You could argue that Rock Island helped build the Midwest. It supplied farm equipment to thousands of farmers across flyover country. It also helped the nation win World War I. But today, you can walk through downtown and you can hear your own echo. In this video, we'll look at the history that once made Rock Island special. We'll also look at how it's fallen to become one of the more depressing cities in the Midwest today. That being said, me personally, while driving through the city and seeing everything, I really love the architecture of the buildings throughout the city. The buildings in downtown, the homes in the neighborhoods, I really like the way that these buildings look. You know, collectively, I don't know what it is. It's just a really cool old feeling, and it's a shame that the city has fallen as badly as it has. Well, as always, make sure to stick around until the very end, where I'll give Rock Island a Chris Livability Score. Rock Island is in western Illinois along the Mississippi River. It's a part of the Quad Cities region, along with Davenport, Moline, and Bettendorf. Although, maybe calling Rock Island the Quiet City these days would be more accurate. Before the 1970s, the Quad Cities actually included East Moline rather than Bettendorf, because at the time, Bettendorf was the kid at the Thanksgiving table. Once Bettendorf got big enough to be relevant, however, people considered calling the area the Quint Cities, but come on, Quad Cities just sounds better. Really quick, don't forget to hit like and subscribe. Otherwise, my channel might start declining faster than Rock Island's population after 1960. Doing so can help me avoid becoming the next YouTube version of an empty storefront on 2nd Avenue. So yeah, if you don't mind, just go ahead and scroll on down below and hit the buttons if you enjoy this type of video. Much appreciated. Thanks. Initially, this region was called the Tri-Cities. The Quad Cities term didn't even show up until around the 1960s. That being said, Rock Island was always the second largest city in this area. Until it wasn't. The decline started in the 1960s after hitting a peak population of 51,863. Since then, it's been sliding faster than an Illinois taxpayer's patience. No other Quad City has seen a similar drop, just Rock Island. Additionally, Rock Island County used to support a much larger population than Scott County, Iowa. For reference, Rock Island County is home to both Rock Island and Moline, while Scott County is home to both Davenport and Bettendorf. So not only has the city of Rock Island declined, but so has Rock Island County. To sum it up, the Illinois side continues to decline, while the Iowa side continues to casually grow. Turns out, the secret to financial success in the Quad Cities is pretty simple. Move to Iowa. Speaking of packing up and leaving, welcome to downtown Rock Island. Outside of the Holiday Inn Express, there's not much going on here these days.
You look like Eminem from 8 Mile.
No, not quite like that. Actually, it's pretty different. Anyway, it shouldn't be surprising to see it this way after learning that Rock Island has lost about 30% of its population over the last 60 years. Throughout this time, the city has rolled out roughly a dozen rebrand attempts, but none of them have worked. Speaking of rebrand attempts, that brings me to this. So this is downtown Rock Island along 2nd Avenue, along a stretch where it used to be a pedestrian plaza, but in the last few years, they've reopened the roadway to vehicle traffic, and they've redone all the sidewalks here, and that part of everything looks pretty nice, but it also looks like a lot of these restaurants are closed. Man. It's a Monday morning. I'm the only one here. I am the only one here. As I said, I was here early on a Monday morning, of course, so maybe there's a little bit more life on a Friday night, but it can't be much. I mean, look around. There's only a handful of places open, and they all seem to be competing for the title of Last One Standing. Back in the day, 2nd Avenue here in Rock Island really used to be something. It was the main shopping area for the city. Fast forward to today, and Rock Island really wants 2nd Avenue to be something again. I kind of really want it to be something too, because it has the looks, it has the potential, it just doesn't have the business. In the early 20th century, 2nd Avenue was anchored by the Harper House Hotel, later known as the Staley Hotel. That building was torn down in 1973, however, and was replaced by the Spencer Square office building. Today it's known as the Star Crest International Building, though international doesn't really seem fitting, unless they mean that all the tenants went abroad. This place, the Rock Island Brewing Company, aka Ribco, she gone. And no, 1815 isn't the founding year. That's just the street address. Regardless, the plaque helps give off that historic roots energy, doesn't it? Well, it's too bad that it closed, because now all you really have is a taco and a Thai food place. Now, there was a story that came out on September 25th, 2025, which was just a few weeks before I uploaded this video, that reported how new ownership plans to reopen Ribco by the end of the year. Hopefully it can happen, but here's the thing. I've seen this plot before, and if you're from Rock Island, so have you. You know, struggling community, abandoned building, new owner promises a revival, only for those promises to fall flat. It's like egg on the face for the people who still care. The ones with that last bit of community pride left, who want so badly to see an economic comeback. Listen, I'm not saying that it won't happen, but I'm also not saying that it will happen. I'm saying that I'll believe it when I see it. And genuinely, I hope it works out. I really do, because the potential is here and the infrastructure is already in place. Problem is that Rock Island has been ready for a comeback for around 60 years. That's right. 60 years. 2nd Avenue between 17th and 19th Streets was blocked off to vehicle traffic in the 1970s for a pedestrian mall with the intention of reviving downtown Rock Island. Guess what? It didn't happen. Back then, the problem was what most American cities were facing: retail moving out to the suburbs. The shiny new pedestrian mall was supposed to be attractive, and it was supposed to make people want to come back into downtown, which in the 1970s, a pedestrian mall in downtown was a common strategy across Midwestern cities. Well, it didn't work, and in 2003, Rock Island decided to remove half of the pedestrian plaza and reopen it to traffic, but not the whole thing. The other half wasn't converted back to vehicle traffic until early 2025. So, what is the future of 2nd Avenue? Will it eventually come back, or will it continue to look dead? We'll have to wait and see. However, this building ain't new. It's the Circa 21 Dinner Playhouse. That's not what they called it, though, back in 1921, when it was the Fort Armstrong Theater. Fort Armstrong refers to, well, Fort Armstrong, which I'll get more into later. But back when this place first opened, it was definitely the place to be in town. It seated nearly 1,800 people. Inside, it had chandeliers shaped like teepees to pay tribute to the Indian heritage, walls with prairie-themed murals. It was basically Rock Island's version of Broadway. The theater originally was named as The Castle That Shadows Built, due to its abundance of silent movies. Like most grand old theaters across the country, it thrived for about 30 years before the suburbs came along and stole its audience with shiny new modern movie theaters. Around the 1970s, demolition rumors started flying, but that's when a guy named Dennis Hitchcock, "What up, Dennis Hitchcock?" came through with his hero cape on and saved the day. He bought the building in 1976,
snapping necks and cashing checks,
and turned it into a dinner theater, naming it Circa 21, a nod to the original 1921 opening year, and somehow was able to bring the place back to life. Today, it's one of the few surviving assets in downtown Rock Island from the city's golden era, and it still puts on live musicals and plays. It's proof that even in a city that struggled, a few landmarks still know how to hang on. Head on down to the river and you'll find another spot. Schwiebert Riverfront Park.
This is Rock Island's version of a waterfront attraction. But really, it's a place where you can stare at the water and try to remember why you came. Great views of downtown Davenport, at least.
Just kidding, people. Hey, if you're from here, at least you have a riverfront park. Not every city bothers to make theirs look this good. Although, if Rock Island really wanted to take things to the next level, they could add a pedestrian bridge over First Avenue in the tracks. I mean, Rock Island pretty much has a PhD in downtown revitalization projects that go nowhere, so might as well go all in, right? That brings me to this, the old courthouse site, or the site that used to have a courthouse but no longer does. The old courthouse was completed in 1896, built in a Spanish Renaissance style, which for Illinois was about as rare of a find as a politician that tells the truth in this state.
What up, Governor?
And that wasn't even the first courthouse here. The one before it arguably looked even better, so naturally, yeah, they tore that one down too. Anyway, demolition of the Spanish-style courthouse began in 2023, sparking protests from locals who wanted to preserve it. County officials claimed that the building was too far gone and was unsafe, while protesters fired back,
Not up in here!
saying that the stonework was solid and that the county just didn't want to pay for repairs. Then the county said that the courthouse sat too close to the newer government building, to which the locals basically said, so what? Every old city has buildings close together. But as usual, the county had their way and the courthouse came down. Now the site's a green space because nothing says revitalization like grass where a county courthouse used to be. At least the old City Hall building still stands. This was built in 1940 and as far as I know, there's no plans to tear this one down, so that's all good and dandy. Really quick, before we go back in time, make sure you're following me on Instagram, Facebook, and whatever's left of Twitter, because if this YouTube thing collapses like Rock Island's old courthouse, that's where you'll find me. Thanks. Now, before all of the government drama and downtown revitalizations, Rock Island actually started with a much simpler purpose, as a trading post and as a military installation. Before European settlement, the land that the Quad Cities sits on today was Sauk Indian tribal land, led by this guy, Black Hawk. The city has actually paid tribute to him in a lot of ways over the years, which is kind of ironic considering, well, you'll see. In 1809, land was set aside by Congress as a federal military reservation. A few years later, in 1816, the U.S. built Fort Armstrong on an island in the Mississippi, the same island that would later give Rock Island its name. The fort was meant to protect American interests along the river and to keep a close eye on native tribes, which, surprise, didn't go over very well with Black Hawk. That tension led to what became known as the Black Hawk War in 1832, when Black Hawk led roughly 1,000 Sauk, Fox, and Kickapoo men, women, and children, including about 500 warriors, across the Mississippi to reclaim their Illinois homeland. This was land that the U.S. claimed the tribes had already given up back in 1804 after signing a treaty in St. Louis. In exchange, they got $1,000 a year in cash and supplies. So basically, that's equal to a Netflix subscription and a $25 gift card to Target for everyone affected. But here's the thing. The tribe said that they were tricked into signing the treaty. They claimed that it wasn't negotiated by actual chiefs, but by a few guys who didn't have the authority to sign it. So when Black Hawk decided to fight back, panic set in among white settlers and the US military. So what did the US do? Well, they responded.
Well. What do we got here?
To Black Hawk with a 7,000 or so army of their own. Needless to say, the Indians were outnumbered and out of luck. By 1837, those who survived fled west and the Northwest Territory was officially claimed by the United States.
So this is really the only part of Rock Island that the public is allowed to access. On the other side of this railroad track here is the Rock Island Arsenal. And this is a historic park here. Fort Armstrong, built 1816, abandoned 1836.
Fort Armstrong was the foundation for the town that would eventually get built on the south side of the Mississippi River. A settlement was first platted in 1835, 2 years before the native tribes even surrendered, called Stevenson. By 1841, they finally settled down with the name of Rock Island, as the name was already in place with the county and with the island. For a while, Rock Island stayed relatively small until 1856, when the Chicago and Rock Island Railroad came through. That railroad happened to be the first railroad bridge over the Mississippi River, so that bridge changed everything. It turned Rock Island into a hub for transit and freight. Basically the 1850s version of a logistics hub, minus the 2-day shipping. From there, industries like lumber, pottery, farm equipment, manufacturing, and rail supplies took off. Throughout this time, the island also kept its military roots, eventually housing one of the most important army installations in the country, the Rock Island Arsenal. By the turn of the 20th century, Rock Island wasn't just another river town, it was firing on all cylinders. Factories, freight, and the fort all kept the city's economy running. Agricultural manufacturing, however, led the way. If you were a farmer anywhere in the Midwest, odds were that some piece of your equipment was stamped, forged, or assembled right here in the Quad Cities. Now, before I get into talking about the industry that shaped Rock Island's economy, I can't forget to mention John Looney. In fact, this was his house. It's been restored over the years, and a look at Google Street View from 2015 shows it being in really bad shape, at least landscaping-wise. Look, John Looney would have shot me if I drove by his house with a camera 100 years ago and criticized the appearance of his crib. Dude was a menace to society. He's been known as the OG Quad Cities Vice Lord. His career of being a criminal began once he lost when running for the Illinois State House as a Democrat. Apparently, he took that very personally. Looney controlled an unmatched empire of extortion, bribery, booze, gambling, and prostitution during the Prohibition-era. He did all of this while being married and having kids who attended Catholic school. He also ran the Rock Island News from 1905 to 1923, a newspaper that was so unprofessionally published, they say, it was full of filthy words and inflammatory language it made today's social media look classy. One of Looney's biggest crimes came from the time that the mayor of Rock Island in 1912 pressed for prosecution of Looney's henchmen on gambling charges. Looney responded by attacking the mayor in a series of articles in the Rock Island News. The mayor had police bring Looney into his office, where the mayor then beat him as officers watched, and it severely injured Looney. The next night, Looney's gang held a meeting in Market Square. The crowd grew to more than 2,000, and the angry mob stormed the police station, where the police then fired back, killing 2 bystanders and injuring 8 others. You know, if I wasn't mistaken, I would have thought that this headline would have been from 2025. Look, we've come a long way, haven't we? Anyway, Looney then left town and fled to New Mexico, but returned to Rock Island 9 years later in 1921 and regained control over his gang. He controlled nearly all of the gambling and prostitution houses in the city.
I'm kind of a big deal. People know me. I'm very important.
And in the surrounding Midwest. Long story short, he rose to power through blackmail and gunfire. Eventually, though, Looney was ratted out by a former police officer. Looney had him killed shortly after, and in 1922, all of Looney's operations collapsed when his saloons and brothels were closed. Plus, one of Looney's homes was raided, and he lost all of what made him powerful. The Rock Island News stopped publishing, and he eventually fled back to New Mexico, where he was captured and brought back to prison in Rock Island. So basically, James Looney was a criminal who had a huge presence here in Rock Island, but ran operations throughout the entire Midwest. He was a pretty well-known criminal at the time, and it was quite a big deal here during the 1910s and 1920s. While Looney was running his crime empire, Rock Island's factories were running something far more productive, an industrial boom that helped define the city's identity. One of the biggest names was the Buford Plow Company, which later became the Rock Island Plow Company. And we're not talking snow plows here. They started out building horse-drawn plows and other farm tools, but eventually expanded into tractors, which were kind of a big deal back when horsepower stopped meaning, well, you know, actual horses. The company grew so large that it competed with John Deere in the neighboring city of Moline. Then, there was the Rock Island Arsenal, which brought thousands of jobs to the area. They manufactured weapons, ammunition, and just about anything that the U.S. Army could throw at an enemy. It's still running strong today. It's still one of the most productive and longest-lasting operations in the Quad Cities. There was also the Rock Island Stove Company, which produced cast-iron stoves that now sell as antiques for probably more than what they paid the workers. It operated from 1868 to 1929 and was one of the first to produce stoves for this part of the country. There was also Rock Island Millwork, which made cabinets, doors, and trims for homes and commercial buildings across the Midwest. Then there was the Rock Island Watch Company that was founded in the early 1900s, which tried to put Rock Island on the map for fine timepieces. It didn't last long. Turns out, the only thing that wasn't on time was their business plan. All of this and more made Rock Island a true industrial hub. Until it wasn't. After World War II, Rock Island's economy was still booming. Factories were busy, the arsenal was strong, and International Harvester was a massive employer.
It's a massive plant, one of the biggest in the world.
But underneath all of that, the seeds of decline were already being planted. Not just by automation or competition, but by a civil war inside the unions themselves. Starting in 1949, the Quad Cities became ground zero for what newspapers called the country's largest union war. The United Auto Workers, the UAW, tried to take over the left-leaning Farm Equipment Workers Union, known as the FE. Both represented thousands of workers at Harvester, John Deere, and other plants across the river. It got ugly. Literally. In 1949, a full-on brawl broke out outside of the East Moline Harvester gates, with clubs, brass knuckles, and steel helmets flying. It was basically the WWE, Labor Union edition. The FE Union had deep roots in Rock Island. It was militant, known for its wildcat strikes, short contracts, and a strong local control. Management hated them for it, but workers liked that the union actually stood up for them on the shop floor. The UAW, on the other hand, was becoming more corporate-friendly under Walter Reuther. What up, Walter Reuther? Pushing long contracts and labor peace. That kind of peace usually meant less power for the workers. Then came the 1952 International Harvester Strike, a turning point. 23,000 FE workers walked out nationwide, including right here in Rock Island. Harvester fought back hard, hiring replacements, reopening plants, and using racial divisions to break up picket lines. The strike dragged on for almost 3 months before the union caved, signing what workers called the worst contract in Harvester history. After that, the militant unions never fully recovered. The UAW eventually absorbed most of the FE locals by the mid-1950s, and with that, a lot of Rock Island's industrial identity started to fade. You could almost hear the sound of factory whistles being replaced by paperwork. Workers kept their jobs for a while, but the era of small, loud unions fighting for local control was over. The companies got bigger, the contracts got longer, and the workforce got smaller. Kind of like the modern job market, just with more asbestos and fewer HR seminars. By the late 1950s, the FE was gone, International Harvester began scaling down, and the arsenal was losing manpower after the Korean and Vietnam Wars. Rock Island's industrial flame didn't go out overnight, it just burned quietly over a 2-decade or so stretch until there wasn't much left to burn. In the 70s and 80s, International Harvester completely collapsed, closing for good in 1985. Imagine the Ford Motor Company disappearing off of the face of the planet and how devastating that would be for the Metro Detroit economy. That's exactly what happened here in the Quad Cities when Harvester went under. This wasn't just one company closing, it was the economic backbone snapping in half. Dozens of smaller factories across Rock Island, Moline, Davenport, and East Moline supplied Harvester with parts, tools, and materials. So the machine shops, the foundries, the tool and die plants that all supported International Harvester, those were all gone too. So really, it triggered a chain reaction that spread through every corner of the Quad Cities. Thousands of jobs disappeared, families moved away, and entire neighborhoods started to hollow out. More so in Rock Island, however, than anywhere else in the Quad Cities. Sure, John Deere survived, but automation cut their workforce too, and while the Rock Island arsenal stayed open, it quietly shed workers decade after decade. So the jobs didn't vanish overnight, they just slowly faded away, one paycheck at a time. By the end of the 1980s, Rock Island's industrial identity was gone. The factories went silent, the rail yards were quiet, and the city was left trying to figure out what came next. Unfortunately, today, Rock Island is still trying to figure out what comes next. Since 1960, the city's lost around 15,000 people. Roughly 30% of its population. Gone. Downtown started to empty out, and while it looks quiet now, it probably looked even worse back then. Retail fled to the suburbs, leaving 2nd Avenue lifeless most nights. Buildings that once defined downtown sat empty for decades, collecting dust and pigeons instead of paychecks. Crime started to creep up too, which didn't exactly help the city's reputation. By the 1980s, no part of the Quad Cities had it worse than Rock Island. I talked earlier about how there's been so many revival attempts for the city. Well, here's another. Gambling.
Good luck with that.
Casino Rock Island was open for business in March 1992, but it only did so much. Rock Island couldn't keep the upper hand for long because across the river, Davenport jumped into the riverboat gambling scene too, in which Davenport did it bigger, flashier, and faster. Theirs had better access, better marketing, and better luck. While Rock Island's casino was supposed to reel in tourists and boost the local economy, Davenport's riverboats ended up stealing most of the spotlight and the customers. Part of that wasn't even Rock Island's fault. Illinois piled on stricter gaming taxes and tighter regulations, while Iowa practically rolled out a red carpet for riverboat gambling. So, while Rock Island was busy paying fees and filling out paperwork, Davenport was busy cashing in. So once again, another example of a neighboring state outplaying Illinois. Casino Rock Island remained open until the new casino and hotel was built on land in December 2008 on the far southwestern side of the city. Because when all else fails, just count on tourism and slot machines. Today, it's Bally's Quad Cities Casino and Hotel. It sits on the far southwest outskirts of town because, apparently, downtown wasn't high stakes enough. That being said, now we're going to go do some sightseeing throughout the town. First up, it's the unofficial Blackhawk Tour. This is the Blackhawk State Historic Site, one of the best spots in Rock Island. A forest preserve that sits on what used to be the Sauk village of Saukenuk, which was once one of the largest Native American settlements in the entire Midwest. Today it's hiking trails, picnic areas, and a bunch of historical markers that most people probably never check out. They just end up driving past it on their way to Target and Moline. Well, there also used to be a theme park here, that being the Blackhawk Watchtower Amusement Park, which opened in the late 1800s. It had roller coasters, a Ferris wheel, and a beer garden because, in America, it's not sacred land unless it gets a beer garden. The park ran for decades before the state of Illinois acquired the land for a state park in 1927 because, in Illinois, every good time eventually becomes government property. Just north of the state park was the Watchtower Plaza. It was a shopping center that fell apart. In 2012, the city began plans to build a new Walmart here, so in return, stores left and some of the buildings were torn down. A Walmart never showed up though, and the place got rough looking, but one thing always stood out, which was the Blackhawk statue. Well, now that's gone too, because in 2023 a severe storm knocked it over and it was hauled away not long after. Now the entire plaza's been demolished. I mean, they promised a Walmart and delivered a vacant lot. Talk about rollback prices. Throughout the city, you can see Blackhawk memorabilia displayed on buildings, and it's actually all over town if you go look.
So I'm in a part of Rock Island that is really depressing overall. There's a lot of abandoned homes, a lot of abandoned businesses, a lot of empty lots. It doesn't look great. There's also an abandoned museum.
This is one of the more unique landmarks in Rock Island, the Karpelus Manuscript Library Museum. This place was a part of a nationwide network of museums founded by David Karpelus.
What up, David Karpelus?
A millionaire collector who bought up historic buildings across the country and turned them into small manuscript museums. You could find original letters, historical documents, or even old sheet music on display. Basically, if it was written on paper and looked important, it probably ended up in a Karpelus museum somewhere. The Rock Island location opened up in 2012 inside the old First Christ of Church Scientist building, which was built in 1914 out of Bedford limestone. That would be from Bedford, Indiana. In 1994, the church sold the building, and the property was foreclosed in 2007. It went mostly unused until 2012, when it was purchased by the Karpelus family. The revitalization of the building gave downtown something that it hadn't seen in a while: visitors who weren't lost.
Bruh.
But in 2023, the museum closed for good, and the building's been sitting empty ever since, which is unfortunate because when it shut down, there was actually some excitement. The plan was to turn it into a restaurant and brewery. You know, the go-to Midwestern Hilljack solution. Well, I came by in the summer of 2025 and the only thing brewing here was weeds, so clearly that never happened. Nobody really knows what's next for this building. In all reality, that should be Rock Island's motto. No one knows what's next.
Not even the grass is mowed on this property. Oh, and by the way, right across the road from the abandoned museum is an abandoned school.
Now, just when you start thinking about just how many things there are in Rock Island that have fallen apart, there's this place, the Hauberg Estate.
So this is the Hauberg Estate. It's proof that if you build something big enough, people will pretend to care 100 years later. No, it's a pretty nice house, obviously. Turned into a museum of some sorts.
Completed in 1911, this 20-room mansion was once home to John and Suzanne Hauberg, part of one of Rock Island's wealthiest families. John was a prominent businessman, and Suzanne, she was a social reformer who helped start the city's YWCA. So basically, they were Rock Island's version of the Vanderbilts, just with fewer railroads and more common sense. The estate was designed by architect Robert C. Spencer, who studied under Frank Lloyd Wright, and you can definitely tell it's got that prairie school look, horizontal lines, brick details, and a layout that says, yes, I have old money, but I also read architecture magazines, so back off, leave me alone, and let me be in mi casa.
I'm very important. I have many leather-bound books.
For decades, this place was a hidden gem tucked into the hills above the city. Today, it's actually open to the public and used for events, weddings, and tours, which in Rock Island is kind of refreshing. A piece of history that isn't boarded up or torn down. Really, it's just another reminder that the city was once booming. From one preserved mansion to an entire neighborhood, welcome to the Broadway National Historic District. The Broadway neighborhood has more historic homes than anywhere else in the Quad Cities, so basically, Rock Island's biggest success story is one that hasn't changed in over 100 years. This area is one of Rock Island's oldest and most architecturally significant neighborhoods, filled with 19th and early 20th century homes that look like something straight out of a Victorian catalog. If you dropped someone off here blindfolded, they might think that they're in an old money Chicago suburb, until they spot the one house with a roof tarp that's now a permanent architectural feature. The neighborhood was listed on the National Register of Historic Places in 1998, and honestly, it's easy to see why. You'll find everything from Queen Anne and Colonial Revival to Craftsman-style homes. Basically, it's a great collection of old-school designs, just don't look too closely at the foundations. What makes Broadway interesting, though, is how much of it's been brought back to life. Homeowners here have fought tooth and nail to preserve these houses, and groups like the Broadway Historic District Association deserve serious credit. Without them, this place instead probably would have turned into the boarded-up Way District. Sure, not every home's in perfect shape, but compared to the rest of the city, Broadway's doing pretty well. It's the kind of neighborhood that makes you wish Rock Island had more blocks like this one. Next up, we've got another one of Rock Island's biggest bright spots, which is Augustana College. Founded in 1860 by Swedish immigrants, Augustana moved to Rock Island in 1875. It's a small liberal arts college that somehow feels like it was airlifted in from another dimension, one where lawns are manicured, buildings are maintained, and students actually seem happy to be there. You walk through here and you almost forget that you're in Rock Island. That is, until you leave campus and see a bunch of boarded-up buildings. When Augustana College moved to Rock Island, it somewhat transformed the city because it brought with it a huge Swedish population. Before that, Rock Island was just your typical gritty river town, but after the college, it had some kind of elegance. And now, it's back to being your typical gritty river town. Anyway, over the years, Augustana's presence has kept part of the city alive in more ways than one. It brings in students, professors, and visitors, which means at least somebody's still spending money in Rock Island. Plus, the college has a reputation for solid academics, especially in the sciences and liberal arts. Basically, it's one of the few places in town where optimism hasn't gone completely extinct. If the rest of Rock Island looked like Augustana's campus, this video title would have been completely different. Now on the southwest side of Rock Island is an area that the city leaders have been trying to hype up for years. Milan Bottoms.
Next up on the failed agenda for the city of Rock Island is the Milan Bottoms development. Hasn't been built yet. Needless to say, it's triggered a lot of outrage among the residents.
If you haven't heard of it, the Milan Bottoms is a large stretch of land along the Rock River that's been pitched as Rock Island's next big thing, more times than I can count. The idea has been floating around for decades, a mix of nature trails, river access, and a new development plan to connect Rock Island and Milan. Basically, a build it and they will come kind of plan, minus the actual building part. Lately, the plans have been centered around building a large gas station and dispensary next to the casino. The city has also claimed that doing that would resolve the city's budget deficit of $3 million as of August 2025. The future is up in the air. In July of 2025, the Rock Island City Council approved a resolution that offered the next step towards protecting the Milan Bottoms area, as it's home to dozens of species and animals including birds, mammals, amphibians, and reptiles. 10 of those are either state or federally protected species. Rock Island put this forth to try to go through with their plans, but also have the people's interest in mind. I mean, the Milan Bottoms area is kind of like a part of a larger delta as the Rock River empties into the Mississippi. It's not technically a delta as it empties into another river, but it's close enough, and there's a lot of pushback from locals on any type of new developments here, despite Rock Island's desires to develop this area. From potential new developments to old stuff, we're going to head on over to Douglas Park.
This is Douglas Park. It's where the first NFL game was played, but you probably wouldn't know it if you came here and looked around because there's not much to tell you that this is where the first NFL game was played. Kind of a missed opportunity there by the city of Rock Island.
This isn't just any local park. Douglas Park is one of the most historic sports sites in the entire Midwest, and it's right here in Rock Island. This is where the Rock Island Independents played back in the early 1900s, one of the founding teams of the National Football League. Yeah, the NFL. Before $1 million stadiums and Taylor Swift showing up to Chiefs games, there was Douglas Park. The first official NFL game in history was played right here in 1920. The Rock Island Independents versus the St. Paul Ideals. Rock Island won, by the way, 48-0. Guess you could say they peaked early. The Rock Island Independents were founded as a club in 1907, then joined the newly formed NFL in 1920, left for newly formed AFL in 1926, but the entire league fell through the following year, including the Rock Island Independents, so they only lasted until 1927. Douglas Park was also home to minor league baseball teams, high school games, and community events for decades, but like much of Rock Island, it fell into decline. Bleachers rotted, fields overgrew, and for a while the place looked more like a time capsule than a stadium. In recent years, local volunteers have actually brought Douglas Park back to life, cleaning it up, fixing the stands, and even hosting football games again, so hopefully they can continue to build off of that momentum. It's not Lambeau Field, but it's got more history per square foot than most stadiums in America, and it's proof that sometimes Rock Island's past really can get a second chance. So just how bad are things really in Rock Island today from an economic standpoint? Well, not good. The median household income is $57,292 a year, which is more than $20,000 per year lower than the Illinois overall median household income. 1 out of every 5 Rock Island residents lives in poverty, and the median value of owner-occupied housing units is $118,000, which is less than half of the value of that for Illinois, and it's significantly less than the value of that for the Quad Cities metro area. About 22% of adults 25 and older have at least a bachelor's degree, which, if you've watched this channel long enough, that's not the worst that you've seen. Same with high school graduates, as 90% of adults have a high school diploma. The worst of the economic decline for the city can be seen in the part that we're driving through right now, which I would say is pretty much the western third of the city.
Man, decades of decline, stalled projects, and a declining population. It all adds to one thing: Rock Island's reality check. Let's see how it adds up in the Chris Livability Score.
Education.
If you're looking to raise a family in the Quad Cities area, Rock Island ain't it. At this point in the journey, we've seen cities with worse schools, but we've also seen ones with much better schools. U.S. News ranks Rock Island High School 10th out of the 12 high schools in the Quad Cities metro area, with Bettendorf being the lead quad city out of the group. It also says that only 77% of students these days are graduating Rock Island High School. So that's not a good thing. Education gets a 5 out of 20.
Crime.
Crime here isn't as bad as it's been in the past, but it's still above average. The violent crime rate isn't quite double the national average rate, but it's close. And the property crime rate is slightly above the national average rate. Crime gets an 8 out of 20.
Downtown.
Oh man, there's so much potential here, isn't there? But there's a lot of work to do. There's a riverfront park that's nicely kept up with at least, but downtown Rock Island just feels like a dinosaur museum these days. Downtown gets a 5 out of 20.
Economy.
With Illinois' strict regulations and high taxes, it's hard to see Rock Island turning things around with Iowa right next door. Earlier in the video I mentioned how Rock Island County continues to decline in population, while Scott County, Iowa continues to grow in population. It's simple. Illinois drives businesses and people away with its high taxes and strict regulations. The only thing going for Rock Island is that it's a part of a small to mid-sized metro area where it can maybe sometimes benefit off of the better economics of its neighboring cities. Economy gets a 5 out of 20.
Environment.
With Rock Island's industrial past, there's bound to be some kind of legacy pollutants here. The Rock Island Arsenal has some lead contamination, it looks like. There's also the old Rock Island plating, which is now taken up by Section 8 housing. Go figure. There's a few other areas of concern as well. It might not be where they conducted the Manhattan Project, but you also might want to test your soil before you grow a vegetable garden in your backyard. So the industrial past gives the environmental score a hit. It gets a 9 out of 20.
Parks and Rec.
Longview Park is nice, it's pretty large, it's in the central part of the city. The Riverfront Park is nice, and the Blackhawk Forest area is also nice. Along with Blackhawk Forest, you have several other recreational assets with the fitness and activity center, but the problem with that whole area is that it's not within walking distance for most of the city. And, just like with most struggling cities, Rock Island could spend a little bit more on the upkeep of their parks. It gets a 12 out of 20.
Scenery.
The Mississippi River adds to the score here, of course. There's some hills throughout the city due to the geography of the Mississippi and Rock Rivers, which makes for some nice scenery, but you can see even more scenery if you drive an hour to the north, towards the Driftless area. But that's quite a bit of ways away, and the Quad Cities can't really take credit for that. Scenery gets an 8 out of 20.
History.
Look, I couldn't mention all of the history in this video, and even if I intended for this video to be 3 hours long, I still couldn't mention all of the history. There is loads of history here. A few things that I left out about the arsenal earlier in the video includes how from 1863 to 1865, the island had a prison on it where over 12,000 Confederate prisoners were kept, and it was one of only 21 camps that were held by the Union. Plus, the arsenal helped the nation in World War I in many different ways with its manufacturing. History gets a 20 out of 20.
Amenities.
Rock Island itself is rather deprived of amenities, but its neighbors help fill in that void. There's a large shopping area in Moline in the far south side that is somewhat close to some areas of Rock Island, but the best selection of amenities in the Quad Cities can be found across the river in Davenport along its border with Moline. Amenities gets a 5 out of 20.
Cost of living.
Housing up front is cheap, but you know the deal. The property taxes are rather high. On this $165,000 condo, the property taxes for a year are over $4,500. That's too much to have to pay in property taxes for bad schools, bad infrastructure, and bad overall service on everything. I mean, that's what all of you say who argue for the high property taxes, right? It's better for services? Well, you don't get those better services in Rock Island, so you might as well live across the river in Davenport. Cost of living gets a 19 out of 20. All in all, the Chris Livability Score for Rock Island, Illinois is 96 out of 200. tying it with Kankakee out of all places, and putting it towards the middle out of all of the cities that I've done this for so far. Really quick, as I ended up driving around Rock Island for a few hours, and during this video, I didn't even get to show you half of the footage that I filmed while being in town. So to see a second video that shows you all of the footage that I filmed from all different parts of town, but didn't use in this video, then make sure to subscribe to my second channel called Chris Harden's Video Archives, and there I'll have my second video on Rock Island. I'll also have it linked down below in the pinned comment once it's uploaded. No doubt that Rock Island has some fascinating history, but there's a complete doubt on the future for this city. I mean, that's all you can expect when you see a city that's on its 7th straight decade of decline. Hopefully things can turn around here. It definitely has the potential to, but unfortunately the state that it's in plays a role in this as well, and there's nothing that Rock Island can do about that. When you have a much more business-friendly state with lower taxes across the board in Iowa that's just a stone's throw away, that's a huge competitive disadvantage for both Rock Island and Moline. Well, to see another video on an Illinois city along the Mississippi River with a strong industrial past that's fallen apart, you should watch this video here. I'll see you in East St. Louis. Peace.